All right, we've entered some logging into our code. We're going to say hello from logging. We're logging an info message, and we need to get it to appear somewhere. So you know the drill. We're going to go back to our PowerShell window, and we're going to check out 3 first output, another tag a little bit further in the progression. And if we go back to the code, nothing changed in the logging message, but as you can see, a whole bunch of stuff is shown up in the app config file. So what we're going to do now is we're going to spend some time understanding what configuration needs to be set up to have your log message go somewhere. Now I'm going to say this now and repeat it in the future. The enterprise application block has evolved to where you can do all the configuration in code. That obviously means you need to change your code if you want to change the configuration. So I still think there's most typically benefit to having the configuration driven by the app config file, because an administrator can change the app config file, the app can be rerun, and you can change how much you log, where it goes. So now let's drill into the app config file. So the first thing that's actually been in the file for a while is the need to set in the config section part of your app config file the section element that contains a logging configuration. So up here we've got logging configuration, and the type is Microsoft Practices Enterprise Library log settings, and the version, pretty straightforward stuff. And then down below here, that logging configuration points to a section that includes the name of the configuration block and a few other things that I'll skip for right now. And then it has a listener section, a formatter section, a filter section, category sources, and special sources. Oh my gosh, it sounds super complicated. Well, the good news is most of the time you just have a pre-configured app config file and you just make changes that reflect what you need to do. I'm going to show a quick slide to help you better understand these. So let's go get Visio. And this slide comes from some excellent documentation that Microsoft produced, which I'll put a reference to, the Developer's Guide to the Microsoft Enterprise Library, 2nd edition. So the way to think about the enterprise application logging block is your client code creates a log entry. That's what we covered in the previous video. Log.info behind the scenes fills in some parameters on the log.entry and then passes it to a log writer. We saw that when we directly access the enterprise application block. And then configuration, and let's move this off to the side. Configuration has formatters, has listeners, there's listeners, has filters, there's the filters, and what did we have? Sources. So everything you see here is defined in the XML in the app.config file. So we're going to drill into that, but you might want to reference, you might want to get that PDF file from Microsoft, and I'll put a link in and then follow along. So the first thing, as I mentioned, you have to define a configuration section for logging. So I called it under lowercase, doesn't matter what you call it, logging configuration. So here's logging configuration. So the first thing you want to do is you want to create a config section that references the enterprise application logging configuration. That's this section up here at the top. Give it a name, logging configuration, and then down here is where we're going to fill in the elements and attributes. So the first thing is give it a name. We're not going to really talk too much about these few properties here. And then what you want to do is you want to indicate it's not necessarily the next thing you do, but one thing you have to do is you have to have somebody listening for log messages. And so we're going to have a listener here. I'm not going to say too much about it, but it's a rolling flat file trace listener. Rolling means it will automatically create a new file every period you define. So in this case, it's going to roll every day. It's going to manage a maximum of 7 days. It's going to use a flat file formatter, and the rest is just pointing to the class. So in this case, it's rolling flat file trace listener, and then the assembly that class exists in. Rolling flat file trace listeners are provided by Microsoft, so you don't have to do anything but use it. So let's go look at formatters next. So a listener takes a formatter. A formatter, once again, has a name. So formatter name here. It has a type, an assembly, and then a template which defines what it is that you want to see. We'll come back and look at this in more detail, but if you just kind of read it, looks like it's going to display something about time, something about the category, the priority, the process name. So whatever all these parameters expand to, it's going to define the format of the output message. So how do we get log info to go to this listener who's going to write things out using this formatter? Well, we have to have a category that's going to listen for the message. So remember in the previous section, we talked about categories, and common log app name, come back and look at that real quick, is just a constant. So intro to logging. And so this message says, I want to send out the message, hello from logging, to the category intro to logging. So if we look at category sources, it has a name, and intro to logging here has to match intro to logging. So I typically put it in a static class. There's nothing magic about this string. It could be foo, it could be the name of the application, it could be the name of the class. It's just some string that's passed in as a category name and then is used by the configuration to go, okay, I found a matching category and I want a listener named rolling flat file trace listener. Oh, that was this. When I see a message with this category come in, I want to use this listener. That listener is going to use this formatter. And hopefully, if all goes well, we're going to get some output. So let's go back and look at the listener and file name, c:temp logs intro to logging. Interesting. So let's open up our temp folder and go to logs and clear out a bunch of other logs. It looks like some of them are in use. But you can see that nothing here matches the file name intro to logging. All right. Let's fire up the application. Realize we didn't make any changes to the code. All we did was change configuration. We got the application, the logging folder, and you'll already notice that when we started the app, intro to logging automatically got created. Just for fun, well, actually, let's open it up first. So let's open it up. And what you can see here, and unfortunately, it appears that it opened up on a different desktop. So what you can see here is hello from logging. There's the message. So what is all this other stuff we got? Well, it looks like we've got a date and time, intro to logging, a number, information, a path to the application, some other numbers, another something, main dot constructor. Oh yeah, main. We called it from the constructor. Interesting. So that looks like the name of the method that logged the message. So let's go back and look at that formatter and bring up the output again. So the template timestamp, there's the timestamp, category, intro to logging. Yeah, we remember that from the message. Priority 100. Well, I don't know where 100 came from, but apparently that's the priority. Severity information. Okay, I'm not sure where that came from. Process name. Okay, that's the name of the process, sure enough. Process ID. Okay, that must be the process ID of intro to logging executable. Thread. Well, okay, thread ID. Username. Oh, that's the user that ran it. That's me. And the method name. Sure enough, that's the constructor. And then duration. Well, I don't see any time here, but I see vertical pipes, and so you look a little bit more carefully, you'll see that all the different parts of this template are separated with the pipe character. You can use anything you want. You don't have to use anything. This is simply the format of the output, and then there's our message. So without making any changes to the code, and by providing a little bit of information, a logging configuration section, populating the section with a category pointing to a listener pointing to a formatter, allowed the logging message to be written, in this case, to a rolling flat file. Pretty cool, right?